The fluorescent light flickered, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare over the bathroom sink. Mark leaned forward, his palms pressing hard against the porcelain until his knuckles turned white. He stared at the man in the mirror. The face looking back was hollowed out, skin sallow, eyes rimmed with the deep, bruised purple of chronic exhaustion. A fine, persistent tremor traveled from his shoulders down to his fingertips. He tried to hold his hands steady, but the vibration only grew, a rhythmic reminder of the substance his body demanded. He looked away, but the image remained burned into his mind. This was the cycle. The same morning, the same mirror, the same crushing weight of another failed attempt to stop. He reached for the counter, his breath hitching. Every cell in his body screamed for the smoke, for the temporary numbness that had become his only constant. He stared at his trembling reflection, but for the first time, the silence felt heavy with something else. Not just defeat, but a cold, sharp realization. He sat at his desk, the screen casting a pale blue light against the dark walls of the room. A video played, showing a woman speaking with a calm, steady cadence. Mark watched, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming a frantic rhythm on the wooden edge of the table. She spoke of affirmations, of changing the internal narrative to alter the course of a life. He scoffed, the sound sharp and jagged in the quiet space. It felt like empty noise, a hollow promise meant for someone who had not spent years drowning in the same cycle. He reached to close the tab, but his hand stopped. He looked at her eyes. There was a stillness there, a lack of the frantic energy that defined his own existence. He leaned in, the blue light reflecting in his pupils. "Change your beliefs. Change your life," she said. He sat back, the words echoing in the empty room. He took a breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in his lungs. He looked at his own hands, still trembling, and forced them to rest flat on his thighs. He opened his mouth, the words feeling heavy, foreign, and wrong. "I am free," he whispered to the empty air. The sound was barely audible. He said it again, louder, his voice cracking. It was not victory, but it was a start. The day stretched out like a long, thin wire, pulled to the breaking point. Every morning, the craving arrived, before he even opened his eyes, a dull ache in his chest that demanded to be fed. He sat on the edge of his bed, his knuckles white as he gripped the sheets. The urge to light up was a physical weight, a phantom pressure against his lungs. He closed his eyes, forcing his breath to slow, counting the seconds until the sharpest edge of the panic subsided. When the silence of the room became too loud, he reached for his headphones. He played the music, letting the low, steady hum of the melodies fill the space where the anxious chatter usually lived. He focused on the rhythm, the way the notes smoothed out the jagged edges of his thoughts. It was a constant battle, a war fought in the quiet corners of his own mind. When the desire to surrender flared, he repeated the phrases, the words acting as a shield against the encroaching fog. He felt the tension in his shoulders, the way his muscles coiled in anticipation of a release that would never come. He was not winning easily, but he was holding his ground. The air in the room was thick with noise and the scent of stale smoke. Mark stood near the edge of the crowd, his pulse a steady, insistent thrum against his ribs. A friend stepped into his space, a familiar gesture, and held out a hand. Between his fingers, a cigarette rested, a small white cylinder that had once dictated every hour of Mark's life. The sight hit him like a physical blow. His breath hitched, his throat tightening as the old, desperate hunger flared in his chest. His hand twitched, a reflexive movement toward the offering. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. In that fraction of a second, the internal chatter rose to a roar, screaming for the familiar relief. Mark closed his eyes, grounding his feet into the floorboards. He heard the words, clear and sharp in his mind. "I choose health. I am free." He opened his eyes, the tremor in his hands subsiding as he looked his friend in the face. "No, thank you," he said. The words were steady, landing with a weight that surprised him. I am done with that. He watched the friend's confusion, but it didn't matter. He turned, his back straight, and walked toward the exit. The door swung open, and he stepped out into the cool night air. The triumph surged through him, a rush of heat in his chest that felt more potent than any substance. The months that followed were not a straight line, but the path grew smoother with every step. Mark woke up each morning to a room that felt different. The air lighter, his lungs expanding without the familiar, heavy resistance. He looked at his hands. The tremor was gone, replaced by a steady, quiet strength. He no longer needed to repeat the affirmations as a shield. They had become the foundation of his daily rhythm. He moved through his day with a clear mind, the old, anxious chatter silenced by a newfound sense of purpose. He had not erased the past, but he had finally rewritten his future. He stood by the window, watching the morning light hit the glass, and felt a profound, deep-seated peace. He was no longer defined by what he had surrendered, but by what he had reclaimed. He took a long, deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly. He was not just surviving. He was thriving, fully present in a life he had built for himself, one choice at a time.